going to do the slideshow. All right, so let's get started. So I'm Melissa Shepard. I am a Salesforce certified technical architect. I am going to present to you DevOps best practices for architects, the stuff I learned as a developer and also through my CTA journey, things that really any architect in a delivery project should be aware of, things they should know, understand, and dive into a little bit deeper here and there. So I'm just going to go over a lot of the high level things. So a little bit here is, what we need from you: participate, ask questions, share your thoughts, experiences. Feel free to type in the chat or ask questions afterwards. And this is really for anyone that's on their journey to architect or journey to CTA. And not everyone knows everything, not even CTAs. So a little bit about me. I have a development background. I mentioned that. I'm a CTA, also B2B and B2C solution architect, 32 times Salesforce certified, Dreamforce 21 Golden Hoodie recipient. I do Trailblazer and MuleSoft mentorship. I've been in Salesforce for 17 years, founder and CEO of Liz Tech Consulting, as well as a nonprofit, Scale Up Arcs, which is launching, which is exciting, to help mentor and coach people to become architects. Also Boston Architect User Group leader, co-leader, I should say, and then founder and admin of Architect Ohana Slack and a new Ladies Be Architects ambassador. So first of all, what is DevOps? So DevOps is the combination of cultural philosophies, practices, and tools that increases an organization's ability to deliver applications and services at a high velocity. So I know this is a term that a lot of people get confused on, and they think DevOps is the tools, it's just the technology, but it's really all these three things together. And that's something that when you get to the CTA review board, you have to be able to bring all that together to really understand what the processes should be and the tools that need to be used and why are you using them. And it's to help with a lot of things like delivering the applications and reducing risk and faster time to market, things like that, higher ROI. So within that, there's the people. So you need to make sure you're defining the roles and responsibilities and assigning those to the right people within your team. And that could be anywhere from your BA to your solution architect, to your technical architect, to your dev leads, to your release manager, your QA, your testers, your business testers, everyone, all these people have roles in this whole process. So you want to make sure you're defining those and assigning them to the right people. And then there's the process that the people are going to follow. So getting the right processes established and the governance measures in place will ensure for better DevOps. Because I've worked in organizations, and I'll get into this later, where we had some DevOps tools, but the process. So things just got out of hand and things just still went bad. And so that we had the people and the technology, but we didn't have the process. And then there's the technology. So making sure you're choosing the right technologies for your organization. So not all DevOps tools are one size fit all. Making sure that the tool will work for the things that you're building and working on, and it's a good fit. So there's also automated testing, things like that, static code analysis. So you want to make sure you're making the right choice based on your organization. And then DevOps teams use practices to automate processes that historically have been manual and slow. So that is really the purpose of it, is to bring in more automation, because that reduces errors, that reduces risk, that increases time to market, time to value, and that increases ROI in the end. So why DevOps? So for speed, you want to move at a high velocity so you can innovate faster. And you want to have rapid delivery. So you want to be able to increase the frequency and pace of your releases. So this is getting stuff out to your customers faster and more reliable. So the reliability is you're ensuring the quality changes so you can reliably deliver at a more rapid pace. And then there's scale. So operate and manage development processes at scale. So if you don't implement proper DevOps that hit all these different areas that I mentioned, it's going to be hard to scale, because without the people, processes, and technology, it's just not going to scale properly. And DevOps also improves collaboration. So developers and operations teams collaborate closely. They share many responsibilities and they combine their workflows. And then for security as well. So you move quickly while retaining control and preserving compliance. So compliance is another huge area where DevOps can make a huge difference. So when things go bad, so this is something I touched on a little bit earlier. So I was working for an app exchange partner as a lead architect and developer, and we were using GitHub in the Force.com IDE, but we really had no other tools. We had no CI/CD automation. We had no developer processes that were really defined and that we had to follow. We remember and follow every day. So the DevOps processes were very manual. So it was really kind of a step up from not having any DevOps at all. And this was really, we were an app exchange partner. So we were really a pure engineering team where we had to do a lot of heavy development. So we had these major merge conflicts in our development branch at one point. Development was being done on a very old feature branch. It hadn't been updated. A bunch of stuff got checked in. A huge merge happened. And then all these merge conflicts just blew up our whole develop branch. So, and we couldn't get a build and we couldn't get anything into, QA or UAT for a while because of this. So it was really hard to reconcile all the differences in the files. The rollback was really difficult and it took many hours and I think days to fix this. So that was a lot of downtime for our development team and for QA as well. That was waiting for this to get fixed so they could move on and test and do their jobs. So as you can see, it's risk, it reduces ROI, and just efficiency was lowered. And it was not optimal, and it made our lives as developers a lot harder as well. So this brings me to the first area I'd like to get into, which is source-driven development. So this is when you want to use source control as your source of truth. Everything goes into and gets deployed to environments from a central source code repository, such as GitHub or Bitbucket, or anything that your organization chooses that, like I said, the best fit. You want to choose the technology based on your organization. So the code repository will act as a central repository for all metadata and code that is always the source of truth. And then all code and metadata should be pushed to the environments from here. So whenever you need to push anything to your developer integration sandbox or your QA sandbox or UAT or your staging, it all should be pushed from the source code repository and then to the proper environments. With that, you need to have a proper branching strategy. So having a defined Git branching strategy, such as Git flow, it should tie everything back to Jira stories as well, or whatever you're using for tracking your stories, because this can help you align your feature branches to a story. So in one organization or many organizations I've worked in, the feature branch was the story number. So you would just create a new feature branch off of develop, name it the same name as your story, and then those two would get connected. So when you would put in your commit comments, that would also get attached to the story, so you can track all the history right on the story. And it also helps with code reviews to be able to do that, so that when the code review is being done, the reviewer can look at the story, make sure that the code is following what the story is saying and that the business requirements are actually being met. Next, which is a bit of this, is your project methodology. So typically you have Agile or Scrum or some hybrids such as Wagile. So, project methodologies such as Agile or Safe Agile can be used. Waterfall may be necessary where there are highly regulated systems or some other needs like that. So then you have to take that into consideration with your DevOps processes, because your releases aren't going to be the same. They're not going to be the same cadence as the Agile. And then you really want to have your story definition and your acceptance criteria defined before the development work is started. I have done here, but that's even before it started. So, well, done, I meant before it's getting worked on, I guess. So And then like I mentioned before, the story and feature branch integration. So you want to make sure you have that when you're getting to a more mature DevOps model. So if you're talking about optimal, that's something you might want to mention. You want to have defined sprints, define length of the sprints, and then be mindful of your meeting cadence and meeting length. Only have what is necessary and keep daily stand-ups short. And this is something I see a lot of companies fall short on. They put way too many meetings on the calendar. They have these hour-long stand-ups, and then your agile is really not so agile anymore. So it's kind of like a fake agile, I would say, because it really slows everything down and makes things harder when you put too much of that into the process. So really trying to keep things lean. Next part is your culture. So this is where you define your roles, your processes, and your tools that will be used within the processes. So everyone on the team should be involved. Closer collaboration and a shared responsibility between development operations, which I mentioned earlier. You want to define who does peer code review. And then you want to have someone that can identify that coding best practices are defined and that they're being followed by the team. That might be your technical architect or someone at, like a higher architect level or a CTA. They might be the ones that are going to define those best practices and what should be followed and where that's going to be stored and how it can be accessed so that can be referenced when code reviews are being done. And I mentioned this before, you want to make sure that code adheres to the business functionality defined in the story. Also, something that's important is having a gatekeeper, because you don't want anyone to just be able to deploy stuff to any environment. So there's a release manager that is responsible for your pull requests. That's what the PR is into your release branch, because that can get very dangerous when you're just letting anyone merge pull requests into something like a developer release branch. And then feature complete. So the release manager will oversee merging branches when the features are complete and the pull request is completed. And defining what tools will be used for source control, CI/CD, merges, compares, testing, like your automated testing, etc. Next, we have developer processes. So what's really important, and like I mentioned earlier on, is a defined developer workflow. So this is you telling your developers every day, make sure you're doing a fetch upstream and making sure you're getting all the latest changes from the develop branch and making sure that the feature branch is not stale, because that's how you can end up with major merge conflicts. So you want to have that process, make sure they're following it. Maybe they're making sure they're committing at least once a day near the end of the day, sometimes multiple times a day. Implementing something such as PMD that has rules, that runs defined rules whenever code is checked in. And then there's the pull request flow. So this is when code is ready to be merged from a feature branch into the main develop branch. The developer opens a pull request. This is where code review is usually done. When everything looks good and it's ready to go, then the merge request is submitted. And then that's usually when your release manager will do the merge. And then when you're doing the code review on the pull request, make sure the code follows the best practices that have been defined and the functionality aligns to the story objectives. So throughout the day, it is really good after any meaningful code, like code change, smaller is better, is done, do a commit and push to the server for validation, testing, and code reviews. Doing this more often means less likely to have merge conflicts. And it's also, if you're doing more code reviews more often, then it's less work that has to be done all at once. Then we have our release processes. So really, you want to have your defined release cycles. You want to know when the releases are going to happen, how they're going to happen, who's going to be responsible for that. It's your release manager, most likely. So you want to plan incremental releases of a product. And you want to have stage releases and then break those down into several different sprints or iterations if you're following Agile. And then you also want to define what gets released. So that's defined by the stories and the sprints. And then you're going to bring those stories into the sprints from your backlog. So you have different Agile ceremonies that will cover doing this, such as your sprint, your grooming, your backlog, meetings. So first you review the backlog, and then you do the grooming of the stories once you bring them in, and then assign the story points and all that. So anyone that's familiar with Agile, that's a bit of the process. And then you also want to define how often you release into production. So this should be defined based on your sprint planning. And this is really important also for your CI/CD when we get to that, which is your continuous integration, continuous deployment. And you want to be able to lock what can be done and pushed and by who in the certain environments. That's where the gatekeeping happens. And then define what branches release into each environment. So that's also going to depend on your branching strategy. Then we also have environments. So this is your environment management of your Salesforce environment. So you want to make sure you're using the right environments for the right purpose. So for example, don't use full sandboxes for all lower environments such as QA, UAT, and stage. I've seen this before. It's expensive. Don't do it. You want to make sure testing is happening by the right people in the correct environments. So example here is QA versus UAT. QA should just be your QA testers. UAT would be where your business users, maybe even business analysts, get in there and start checking functionality to make sure it follows what is expected and was defined. Also, you have to think about seeding your data into environments, and you can use a tool such as GearSet. This is something I'm familiar with. It helps you push data between different environments. So to do proper testing, you need proper data. And it's also good to mask data in DevOps and other lower environments, anything that's coming from production. You want to make sure you're using something. Salesforce has data mask that can help with that. And then you do need to be mindful of your storage and your refresh intervals for each type of environment, as this will determine how much data can be loaded and how often. So I believe like a full sandbox is 29 days. I think the partial is 5 days. And then the developer and developer pro is less than that. Next is testing strategy. So you want to make sure you have a defined comprehensive testing strategy, including automated testing, manual testing, such as scripts for QA, and then your user acceptance testing. So the automated testing is things like your Apex unit tests and any other tests that maybe you want to set up like with something like Probar that can be run triggered automatically through your builds. And then using DevOps tools that can execute the automated tests will help trigger those to happen. And make sure right testing is happening in the right environments. Daily automated unit testing to make sure code isn't falling below 75% code coverage. That's always a good thing to be mindful of, because you don't want to try to go to production with a bunch of code that's under 75%, and then it's a nightmare. And then your release is going to get delayed. And you want to make sure testing aligns to the business objectives. So making sure that the right outcomes are expected. So that's another problem I've seen where the testing has been done, but the outcomes were not aligning with expectations. So they were passing the test because of the way the tests were written, but then the business users are like, well, that's not really what we expected. So you got to make sure those tests are aligning with the expectations. And that is through your upfront definition of your user acceptance testing. So next is the automation part. So this is where the CI/CD automation comes in. So this will help you automate pushing to the right environments via your CI/CD pipelines. So code gets committed to GitHub, then that code will then trigger a job to run to then determine which environment it should be pushed to, what tests should be run, things like that. If there are any issues with the build, usually you can get a notification sent back to your developer to say, hey, the build failed, here's the problem, go fix it. So it stops anything that has an issue from getting into your environment, your upper environments, and it gets fixed before that can even happen. So it helps prevent errors from making it to your higher environments. Auto deployments as well. And then there's automated regression testing that usually happens. Usually you have an environment or a couple of environments where you're going to run regression tests. And then also you can automate running static code analysis using something such as Sonar Cube or Code Scan. So this can happen as part of your CI/CD automation. And like I said, defects are caught sooner and they're less likely to make it into production from lower environments. So this is a really good justification for bringing in automation. So this is a lot of the stuff where you would be able to explain this is what CI/CD is going to do for us, and this is why we want to have it. So putting it all together. So I made a little diagram that's pretty much how I would draw my diagram for the review board, except I put it in Lucidcharts. So I just wanted to go through the end-to-end flow to help try to put all this together, to help everyone see the bigger picture and understand how to put all these pieces together. So here on the left, you have your developers working in a developer sandbox or Scratch org. So they're going to be using tools such as VS Code with the SFDX plugins. They'll have PMD rules that will run when they when they commit their code. They could also be using something such as ESLint for your LWCs for best practices there. And then for testing, this is where developers want to create and run their Apex unit tests. Also use just tests for LWCs, and then mocks and stubs for where there's integration. So this is how you alleviate the risk of your dependency upon something like MuleSoft, where the development is being done maybe more in a waterfall style, just because of the dependence on the different systems. And sometimes you have other systems that can't be on the same development cycle. They might be regulated systems that are more on a waterfall development methodology. So using mocks and stubs is your way around that risk while they're doing that development. So it helps you mock your endpoints and get through all your development and testing. So then your developers are going to do their daily commits on a feature branch. So that feature branch is branched off of develop. Once that feature branch is ready, the pull request is opened, and then that code review gets done on that pull request for that feature branch. And then when that is looking good and it's ready and everything's good to go, that's when that code is going to get merged into develop. And that's where your release manager really would probably be the one to be doing that. So then once that happens, that's going to trigger a job through your CI/CD pipelines to push that code to your dev integration sandbox. So here, this would be something like a dev pro sandbox. You would integrate all your code here. You would smoke test your build and then do regression testing to make sure any new development isn't going to break the build or introduce bugs or defects. So that's all caught in this environment. And then you want to be pushing that code to QA. So depending on the branching strategy you use, you can have a separate branch specifically for QA. So when that code is moved to QA, it gets triggered to go to the QA sandbox, which is likely a dev pro sandbox, or it could be partial if necessary. But always got to keep in mind the cost of the sandbox is how many you get, the data that it can hold, and the refresh interval. But if you were to push it just from your develop branch, you could have a tag to say this goes to QA, and then that is ready to go for QA testing. So this is where you could run automated tests. So getting your automated tests into your lower environments as early as possible will help you lower the risk of bugs getting into production. And then more regression testing, manual test scripts by the QA engineers. And then once that's ready, you push that code through your CI/CD pipelines. Like I said, you can still just be using a tag here. It will go to UAT, to a partial sandbox, so more automated tests. This is where user acceptance testing will happen. This is usually some sort of stakeholder or business user that would go in and make sure that the functionality is as expected and that it meets their standards, and that they think there's going to be user adoption and all that. And then also manual test scripts can be done in here as well. And then from there, it goes to staging. So more automated tests should be run here. This is where you would do a full data migration. So then you have your whole data migration process. You want to do your end-to-end integration testing in here, and then also performance testing, because this full sandbox should replicate your production as much as possible. And then once you're ready to go, you're going to push that all to production. And that's where your smoke testing gets done to make sure everything looks good and nothing's broken. And then you can have some other sandboxes. This is where your environment strategy comes in for your training and your hotfix. So training could be something like a partial sandbox. Hotfix could be a developer pro. And then you would have a hotfix branch. So that's anything that needs to be fixed quickly. It can get pushed to the hotfix, and then that can end up going to production once it looks good. And then once stuff is changed here, you want to make sure you're merging it back to your master as well as your develop branches. So you can see here, your release branch gets branched off of develop once that release is done. And then it will get merged into your master. So your master is like your golden copy of all your code that just, it doesn't get changed or modified. It's where it's just the branch where everything is production ready. And yeah, so if you do create a hotfix branch, you want to branch that off of master, and then that's when you would merge the hotfix back into the master branch. So something I actually learned more about this year is how to measure your success. And I think this could go into some of the ROI analytics for DevOps. So these are called DORA metrics. So this is your best measure of your speed and stability. This is how you can prove your ROI to stakeholders. And it's going to measure key metrics. And you want to have reporting and be able to keep an eye on them so that you can gauge where things are with your process. And then you can go back to the business with the ROI of what you were doing and where improvements could possibly be made. So a tool such as GearSet, which I learned, provides a reporting API for these metrics. So your DORA metrics are deployment frequency, how often release to production is done, and then you want to get user feedback to the team quicker through your deployment frequency. Your lead time for changes, so that's the amount of time it takes for changes to get into production. That's the velocity of delivery. And then the work completed. This is from your first PR opened against a branch to getting that code into production. So that's the time that's measuring. And then there's the mean time to recover. That's the average amount of time for the team to get back on their feet after a failure. And then change failure rate. So this is the percentage of releases that resulted in rollbacks or any type of production failure. So you obviously want to be fairly low. And there's some resources. So I know GearSet has some great ones. They have videos, white papers. They have the DevOps Launchpad that's not specific to their tool. So if you need to learn more about DevOps, and I know Capado has some resources out there, I just haven't been too aware of what those are. I haven't worked too closely with them, but I think the DevOps Launchpad is great. They have a certification out there now. GitHub has DevOps resources. And then there's a book that I always recommend, Mastering Salesforce DevOps, a practical guide to building trust while delivering innovation. And that's it.
Awesome. Thank you, Melissa. So we have a question in the chat, which I'll raise, and I've also got some that I've noted down as well. If anyone else has any questions, please feel free to raise your hand or drop them in the chat. So Cynthia asked, does everyone have a preferable regression testing automation tool? So for me, I don't actually do regression testing. It's always been fairly manual, or I've seen people using things like Provar. But Melissa, do you have a preferred testing tool, or does anyone else on the call have one?
I usually recommend something like Provar.
Cool. Awesome. And Carolyn has a question as well. She's interested to know if you have any experience with the beta DevOps Center tools that Salesforce have got, and any impressions so far.
No hands-on experience yet, but I've seen it. I've learned about it. I know that it's going to be a great tool for creating a source-driven development model within Salesforce instead of using environments as your source of truth. It will integrate with GitHub, I believe, and then you're going to be able to tie the work to stories very easily, something I touched on before, but it's still going to have limited functionality. Yep, it's GA now, like Susanna just mentioned. So Susanna, do you have anything else you want to mention about it?
No, I just say like it is relatively new, but the vision is that it will replace change sets. That's like the purpose of it. So I think the benefit there, and it's like a lot of the third-party apps do it too, but it's like bringing together your source-driven development for both declarative and programmatic things. Like that's the headline, I guess.
Yeah. And it's not going to be as sophisticated as some of these third-party tools. So it's definitely great for anyone that wants to just get started using DevOps. So it will be good to just get in there and just start using it if you don't have any DevOps tools or processes currently.
Awesome. So a question for me. We were talking about doing PRs. That's something I'm often assigned as like one of the PR approvers on a project. But when it comes to doing a PR for config items like Flow, or if you're working with Omni Studio, any of the Omni Studio elements, that's really hard when you're looking at it in source. So I usually just do a review directly in Salesforce itself, and sometimes get the developer to give me a walkthrough. Do you have any other points of view on better ways to do those kinds of PRs, or is that kind of what we're doing at the moment?
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way. The other thing I could think of is just comparing the metadata, but I don't know that that's really going to give you, like, if there's a previous version, if it's new, you can't do that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, if it's a small change, that's fine. Yeah. Cool. All right. We have another question. So someone has a fairly small team, 6 admins and 1 developer. So regarding the formality of having a release manager, can we bypass this and coordinate it so each of us deploy our changes through the pipeline? They're currently in vendor selection with Gearset, Capado, and several other tools. So I have a point of view on this one, and I'll hand to other people as well. When we do DevOps, we have kind of release managers who are responsible for the governance of what gets approved and into source control. So when you've got a feature branch and you've developed something, you need someone more senior or experienced in the tooling that is you're building on to do that review and that check. There's also things that you can do like pair development and things like that, but at least having the PR, I think, is really important to do. But then, yes, sometimes we have fairly small project teams and we do per developer deployments. Once those items are in source control, each developer is responsible for using Gearset to move their functionality into different environments to support QA and then UAT further down the track. Where we're doing like larger deployments, we would have a DevOps lead or a release manager who's responsible for creating a package. But I think using that smaller approach is okay once you've had that governance. But that's my opinion. Melissa or anyone else, have you got different views on that?
I mean, sometimes you can even maybe designate a couple of people that really know the tool. This is how I've worked. I worked with a senior developer that was also kind of the release manager. Maybe you have 2 people, you just have someone as a backup. So even though they have different roles, you can just kind of designate them as in that role. It's a little bit safer than just having everyone have to know the tool and do it. This is actually something I went through in that App Exchange company, was that one person kind of knew, but then they had all of us doing it. And that was where the problem, where we were all just merging our stuff in with not really like understanding the process or knowing exactly how to do everything we were supposed to be doing. So really having like some main people that are experts on the tool or your process or whatever it is, I think that's a little bit of a lower risk. Just that's my opinion on it.
And even just for accountability purposes, for like your whatever release you're doing, making sure that there is someone who's accountable and is checking up on all those like things that can fall through the cracks, like pre and post deployment manual steps, and thinking about things like timing. So it's good just to have clarity in those roles. I think even if everyone like technically knows how to do it, it's just like who's owning the orchestration of all those pieces.
Yeah, for sure. Carolyn has a question. So currently they have a strategy of spinning up new sandboxes from production and then loading the latest master branch to update with any pre-deployment metadata that are past UAT, like they're ready for staging. Is this good practice is there anything else that you would recommend?
So is it this question here?
I can't see your chat.
Oh, in an org for where was the
It's the
question?
one above in an org for parallel streams. It's from Carolyn Campbell.
Oh, new sandboxes from production and then loading. I don't know, actually. I believe I do think you want to push everything. So yeah, because when I did this, we were actually using unmanaged packages to get the environment set up, which it does help because there's a lot of stuff you sometimes can't push from your source control, but for the code. So I'm trying to think, we did the unmanaged package, and I think we actually did deploy the code too after that to get it updated, but I can't remember if it was master or develop. I feel like it was probably develop, because that would have some stuff in it that master doesn't have that's currently being worked on.
Carolyn, you've got your hand up. Did you want to?
Yeah, just to clarify, we ended up in this spot because we were having bottlenecks in our UAT process. And then we would end up with too many things ready for deployment for our deployment manager to successfully get out at once. So then we ended up with another bottleneck up at the deployment level. And we're trying to just make sure that everything that had gone through stage was available for any new sandboxes we were pulling up for new projects. Because often our development level sandboxes might have things that would get sent back and not pass UAT. So yeah, I think it's a messy situation no matter what you do. So that's why the question came up, because we've been trying to find where's that sweet spot where we can be the most efficient, you know?
It sounds like, yeah, there's a bit of a mingling of you're using sandboxes as like a source control as well as source control, if that makes sense. I think it does make sense to have a point in your branching strategy that you say, okay, this is where we are building our new functionality from. We've talked in a previous session about deciding, you're going to have separate developer sandboxes or scratch logs, if you're that way inclined, for every developer who's working on a different feature. And if you're doing that, then you would be pulling from the develop branch for those sandboxes. So maybe it makes sense, if it's obviously sounds like it's all the same org, to have new sandboxes coming from there rather than from production, although that's main, which is probably a lot more stable than the lower down branches that you've got. But yes, you will miss out if someone's just built a new custom object, for instance, and you'll have to merge that in anyway. So I think it would probably be a good activity to map out, okay, what are all the environments and how do they relate to the branches, and where are we merging things in, who's approving them at each stage, because it may also differ on a per project basis. How long lived is a project intended to be, and what are its dependencies on other like ongoing chunks of work, I guess, because there could be very little in the way of dependencies. If you're building out a new app and new custom objects for a brand new team, that's not going to have a whole lot of crossover. Maybe it makes more sense to pull it from production, and you don't really need the part development that's been done already in other projects, and you're not going to need to blend it back in straight away. But yeah, I think it gets tricky when you've got multiple initiatives in the same like code base, basically.
Yeah, I think right now we have 9 or 10 separate initiatives running.
Wow.
And everything comes back to Salesforce. So yeah, I appreciate the advice. Thank you.
Yeah. So the next question from Pooja. So in an org in an org for parallel streams of work with different devs responsible and releases are planned to be sequential, what's recommended as best practices for how pipelines and environments should be set up? What are risks associated and how can they be mitigated? Which I think does really link into what Carolyn just asked. So you need to work out what the dependencies of the streams of work are first, as to figure out, okay, what order do we need to build these things in and how we're going to be able to release. If you're going to have different streams of work, particularly that are touching the same metadata items, like changing a page layout for, one of your account page layouts or something, which is probably going to be touched by a number of these initiatives, you're likely to have to use a lot of different branching to make sure that you can support the different kind of tiers of what's been added to the page layouts, or manual steps to get around accidentally trying to deploy something. Perhaps you've got one release branch, which is where you're doing your UAT from. But if you've got 3 initiatives that are in release branch and you're only going to release one, maybe you need to defer out to a separate branch where you have, okay, and these are the items that are going to be deployed next. So instead of having one release branch with 3 initiatives, only one initiative can make it to release at a time. Otherwise, yeah, you're going to be manually deploying those page layouts, if that will make sense. Any other points of view or questions on that one?
I think you covered it well.
Cool. Anna, Wild West means something pretty different in New Zealand to what you conjure up when you think of the Wild West in America, doesn't it? I think of wild West Coast beaches and rain and a lush New Zealand native forest. Question from Kirsten, or maybe, question from Kirsten. So I went from an org where versioning was set and clear to a company where I'm the only admin/developer. How do I set up to scale for future admins coming on to the team without over-engineering for a one-person team at the moment? Do you have a point of view on this one, Melissa?
Yeah, I guess, you still want to use some sort of process, some sort of tool. That might be a good use case for DevOps Center, having really one person, 1 or 2 people overseeing the release process, kind of acting as that release engineer. Is that what you're looking for? Just to make sure you're not trying to implement something that's too big, where it's mostly admin happening. You still want to make sure your metadata is getting into version control. So you want to use source driven development. So DevOps Center would help with that. So yeah, I would say look into DevOps Center.
Yeah, I agree. The things that we've talked about that are important for a software development lifecycle still exist, whether there's only 1 dev or there's 10. So you still need to be building features and then having people testing them. Whether that's yourself doing some functional testing and then handing to the business for their UAT, that still needs to happen. So you still need environments that support that, that are stable. And
I see less environments in the smaller teams. Maybe there's 1 or 2 less, there's only a few.
Yeah, you probably don't need per feature particularly, you probably don't need that. Just 1 develop sandbox. You probably only need 1 testing sandbox, which can be QA and UAT combined, that kind of thing.
And your staging, yeah, so it'd be a little bit scaled down. That's what I presented, was really the optimal type of strategy you would want to use in a bigger, more global team. So
yeah, I think source control for sure is important, not least because even when it's just you, problems happen that are out of your control related to metadata. there was the famous like permission set and profile loss several years back that people had lost through no fault of their own, a lot of their metadata from their production org, and people who had source control were able to really quickly reestablish that, and people who didn't suffered for a long time to get that reestablished. Permageddon, yes. So I have a couple of other questions as well. So for those of us who aren't so familiar with SonarQube, PMD, CodeScan, Melissa, are you able to just sort of high level explain what those are?
Yeah, so PMD, SonarQube, CodeScan, all really kind of the same thing. So they're you set up rules, and then when your code gets committed, they scan your code to make sure that best practices are being followed according to the rules that you define. So I'm most familiar with PMD. So how it worked for me is I would be in VS Code, I would go to commit my code to the branch, and then PMD rules would run. So there's a PMD rules file that you have to bring in to VS Code. It scans all your code. It will tell you all the issues that you need to fix before your code can even get merged into the branch. I think SonarQube and CodeScan work, they don't work at that level, but it's more like when you're merging from one branch to another. I'm not quite sure. I just haven't used them. I don't know if anyone else here is a little more familiar with them and knows exactly how those work. I'm like PMD, I know. So, but I know they all do similar things.
Thank you. The other one, which is kind of weighing on my mind at the moment, like Agile, Scrum, Wagile, other options. I've never seen Agile in the Scrum flavor done well ever. And I have recently done a more short-term project. It was about 3 months long, where we used Kanban, and that was great. I really liked it for short projects. Do you have any opinions on Kanban as well?
Yeah, Kanban is definitely good for those shorter projects. So what I mentioned was, like I said, the longer, larger, more global projects, or you're going to have multiple systems involved. You might have to have waterfall on your regulated systems or your ERPs. And you have MuleSoft, and then you have Salesforce. You have all these different things that kind of got to be combined. But yeah, I would, if it's something like a 3-4 month project, because I worked in that way. It's just like every week we were just iterating and getting stuff done and demoing, and it was Kanban style. So makes it a lot faster to get stuff reviewed and catch errors. You don't want to go that whole 3 months and get to the end and they're like, that's not what we wanted, because that's a huge risk. So yeah, the shorter, the faster the cycles, the better.
Yeah. Are there any other questions from anyone? All right, we're at time anyway. So thank you so much again, Melissa, for this talk. This was excellent. I will be processing the recording and pop it up on our YouTube channel soon. And yeah, stay on the lookout for our next session. We'll be on LinkedIn and Twitter advertising that for registration shortly. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thank you.